Hi, my name's Keith Cooper, Northlight Images, and in this video I'm going to have a look at a Laowa lens, Chinese lens company, Venus Lens, sell lenses under the Laowa name. Looked at quite a few of their lenses over the years. This particular one is a 17mm lens, so a very wide lens, but it's unusual for lenses I've looked at in that it's intended for the Fuji GFX G mount. So I've been trying it on this GFX100S 100 megapixel medium format sensor. The lens has a coverage big enough for the sensor on this. Now I say medium format, it's small medium format this, so it's 33 by 44mm, not the larger size you would have if you were used to shooting medium format film, which covers a different size as well. Medium format is a bit of a general term of bigger than 35mm, but not large format. This is sort of large format. This is a 5x4, but there we go. That's effectively just an ordinary camera, but with a bigger sensor. So the lenses need to cover it, that sensor. Now, the one I've got here, this is, as I say, f4. You can see the protruding front element there. It's a wide angle, and it is, because 17mm equivalent on this takes you down to what, 14mm or so, or 35mm equivalent. Now of course frame size is different, so it's 4:3 aspect ratio rather than the 3:2 that you'd get with medium with 35mm. So there's a shot that to me gives you an idea of the wide angle. Now I'm going to have a look at some details of the lens, a bit of coverage about what it's like quality wise, some aspects of its construction which are quite interesting as to reveal its origins and the size and shape of it. I'll also mention the Laowa 19mm lens, which is a newer lens which I tried on the GFX100S. I've got a video and an article covering that. I'll link to that in the notes. Now I will have a written article connected with this as well, with more images in that you can have a look at, and more details, more technical details and things, but I don't tend to include too much of that in the videos. Once I've had a look at that, I'm going to have a look at some more images, and in particular when I went to a bit of a building I'd never explored before, using just the 17mm lens and a bit of an idea of how I look at exploring a space when I'm doing architectural photography. So this is looking at what I was trying to show within the constraints of just using this one lens. Now it's a very wide lens, so we're okay there. But normally for my architectural work, I tend to use I use tilt shift lenses. Now this is the Canon TSE-17, which with an adapter works fine on that. This is great because it's got movements. I've got a bit of shift and I've got tilt on it. Now I use shift more often. Simple question several people have asked, is this better than this? Well, if you don't use any movements on this particular example, and as ever it is a particular lens, I'm comparing two physical examples of lenses, not generically being out there. You need lots of lenses to be able to say reliably that one is better than another if they're close. I would say that from the examples I've got here, the corners of the detail at full frame without shift, this one is slightly sharper than this one. However, this one has movements, but we're not interested in that in this instance. We're just looking at using this as a wide angle lens. In case you were wondering, the 19mm is sharper than this as well. But you tend to expect that very ultra wide lenses, and these are on this sensor, very wide lenses, tend to be a little bit softer. None of these have significant distortion, but I'm jumping ahead a bit there. I'll come back to a bit more. What about the actual lens? What's it like to use? It's quite a hefty lens. Now I put all the specs in the written article, but it is a fairly solidly built, it's a metal lens, it's manual focus, there is no electronics on it. So you need to tell, if you're going to use it handheld, as I did, you use the mount adapter settings in this to say, I'm using a 17mm lens. The image stabilization then knows it's a 17mm lens and takes care of it appropriately. So I've got image stabilization, sensor-based image stabilization with a lens like this. very useful because I do enjoy taking shots handheld. I do use a tripod for a lot of my work, but when it comes to it, I just much prefer shooting handheld. Tripods I've long regarded as a relic of the 19th century. Now, as an architectural photographer, they seriously do have their uses, certainly when I'm being paid to do stuff. But for my own enjoyment and stuff like that, I'm much more likely to shoot handheld. It's one of the reasons why I like this particular camera. But we've got here, it has a fairly good focus throw. I'm going to say it's nearly 180 degrees. It's a smooth movement. This particular one has no click stops on the aperture. It goes from f4 to f32. There are no click stops, so this may be ideal for somebody shooting video. I found not having click stops slightly irksome because I'm likely to just touch the aperture ring and move it, and accidentally change for if I decided to shoot at f8, suddenly find I've drifted to f11 or drifted down to 5.6 or something, so you do need to check it. This is a blue ring version, so it's a lens with a 5-blade aperture, but it gives you 10 star spikes on lights. Now the blue ring ones are this. They do also the orange red rings, which have the larger number of aperture blades. The star spikes on this are very obvious, and it is designed to be obvious. Personally, having tested both versions of these, I would get the version that doesn't have the excessive star spikes, because the star spikes, they look great when you want the star spikes there, but when you don't want the star spikes there, well, they're there, so you're stuck with them. As a personal preference, I would do it, but there are different versions. If you check on Laowa's site, the different types of lenses they have, the different settings for that. So it's quite heavy. There's a lot of glass in here. Now, the diagram I've got over here shows the internal construction. The coloured bits are special glasses. But what's interesting with this lens is that typically you tend to get, towards the front, you'll get the strongly curved elements. You'll get some special glasses there. Then you get the midsection of the lens where the aperture ring is. And as you can see, the aperture ring here, it's going to be in the middle. But this lens is quite long for a wide angle lens. And if you look at the design of it, you can see you've got the exotic elements, the green and red bits, towards the back. But then you've got a whole load of elements right at the back. My suspicion is, and looking at some of these diagrams in there, is that this is a wide-angle lens designed for a 35mm sensor. It then has an image expansion section at the back, which is essentially a teleconverter. So this lens would, without all of this lot at the back here, to cover the sensor here, would be a wider angle lens for a smaller sensor. That's what now, I don't know that for certain, but just looking at the lens design, I'm thinking you don't normally have all this lot at the back here covering that. Now, does that make a difference? Not really. Yeah, the lens works very well. Modern lens coatings means you can get away with having lots and lots of glass elements inside your lenses without getting the problems you would have done in years gone by with internal reflections and the like. The lens is pretty good. I do have an example showing flare. Now, this has been really processed a lot to show flare and things. In normal use, it's not that much of a problem. Yeah, it's there, but it's not a significant problem. So it is a heavy. It's a very solidly built lens. It doesn't, as far as I know, have the adjustment which the 19mm lens does to allow you to set an infinity stop. So if you were using this for astro use, you would need to be a bit careful with your focusing. But I'm going to suggest that probably, because this is a rectilinear lens and it is optimized for straight lines, it's optimized for projection, it is not necessarily, there are always trade-offs in lens design, so it is not necessarily the best for point sources, and you will notice towards the corners quite distinctive coma and other aberrations of it. Now, these don't show much in actual images. I've got some examples which I will show on it, but this under a bridge, this particular shot here really shows the dynamic range you can easily get from a camera like this, like the Fuji 100S. It's one of the reasons I use it. Previously I've used this Canon 5DS, and the processing of the images is different. Now, that particular image there, looking the other direction, we can see up the canal, that's canal boat up there. As long as you don't burn out too much the highlights here, you can have some really good shadow and deep shadow recovery without it looking overly processed. Now, I've just taken these shots really to give you a feel for the field of view that you get from the 17mm here. So it's equivalent to, let's say, 14-ish, 13, 14mm on a 35mm sensor. So that's that. But there we go, there's that canal boat. Yeah, classic daylight shot looking down the river. You do, when you're shooting this wide, composition is, I wouldn't say tricky, but it's very easy to just move the camera a short distance and completely change your composition. If you're not used to shooting ultra-wide lenses, take a good bit of time practicing. Look at other people's images, what they've done with wide angle. Think how they've approached aspects of composition, because wide angle shots can look absolutely tremendous, but they can easily look as if they've got lots of wasted space in them. It's quite a tricky thing. I will use lenses like this occasionally. On the Canon here, I had 14mm for quite a while. I use fisheye lenses, so I'm happy with doing wide angle stuff, but you need a lot of attention to the composition. So that's just a nice day out. Now, this building, this is part of De Montfort University. Now, in the architecture department here, I do a bit of teaching of photography, a couple of on some courses. So I know the place quite well. It's also not far from where I live, so it's why it appears in lots of my lens testing. So here we have shot taken at f4. Now, that's f4. There is some quite distinct vignetting in the corners. I go to 5.6. It goes considerably. If I go to f8, then it's almost gone. So you will get some vignetting on that at wide open apertures. And at f4, it's not really, with a lens this short focal length, going to give you massive out of focus effects. I looked at the 19mm, which is an f2.8 lens, and that you can, if you're careful, get some interesting out of focus effects with it. F4, similarly, I find that with the TSE here. If I want out of focus effects, I probably end up using tilt to create it. But for a straightforward lens like here, f4 wide angle lens, you're not going to get much in the way of out of focus effects. You're not going to get sort of cloudy, dreamy backgrounds and things and stuff. It's not like that. You want to use a longer lens. So there we go. That's the difference between the two. So the vignetting, I just go back, you can see that's quite a... Now, in this particular shot here, the building here has some fine brickwork on it, and it's quite good for spotting detail of the lens. So we've got the image at f4. If I take it to f5.6, take it to f8. Corner detail, you need to go to f8. f11, it's similar. If I go to f16, it's softer. f22, softer again, because of diffraction effects coming in. So if you want edge-to-edge sharpness, you're going to be using a lens like this at f8 or so. Now, I know some people will immediately be throwing up their arms in horror, going, oh, the diffraction, won't somebody think about it? Yes, it's there. I will take pictures for whatever aperture I deem fit for the picture I want to take. I will unlikely to use this one at f4 5.6, probably not, unless I need the aperture for some reason for the light. I'm much more likely to go for having this at f8, and it is noticeable the difference in the corner resolution. And it's the corner resolution where I notice the difference between this, the 19mm, and the TSE here. But then, as I said, this one doesn't have shift. This one does. So that's, that's why I use it still. It has its deficiencies. It needs work. Great on a 35mm sensor, but it is always the problem when you go to a larger sensor and try and use your lens. Your lens image circle at the back, the area it covers, needs to be larger. That places more constraints on the lens. So lens design becomes trickier, hence all the glass that you've got inside this one here. Although, as I said, that may partly be because it's almost a lens and a converter together, all in one case here, in one tube. So, yeah, it's not quite the same. The 19, I note, is quite a bit shorter, so it's differences there. You can correct some of this stuff. So if you've got electronic communication with the lens and the camera knows what the settings are and everything, then suddenly this is a 32-64 Fuji lens, and the correction that is applied to this is great. It gets rid of the vignetting, it sharpens things up, it corrects any distortions, all kinds of things you can do with this if you've got it. But this is a fully manual lens. From the camera's point of view, there is not even a lens present. It's just not there. So, remember that. There's no electronics. So there's no EXIF data telling you what you had the settings at. Now, you've told the camera here from the adapter use that you're using 17mm, but the camera itself knows nothing what you've selected here. So it's always the thing to use when you're using manual. Now, obviously it's manual focus as well. Focus works great. I use focus peaking on here. I have the back wheel at the back here set is so that if I press it, it magnifies and zooms in. I can do that. Various other ways I can do the looking at it. But focusing, not a problem. Focusing is obviously much easier if you stop it down to f4, do your focusing, critical focusing, and then change the stop up to what you actually want, so up to f8. That's where I noticed a slight problem with the lack of click stops on it, because I was focusing at f4 to make sure I got good sharp focus, and then taking it to f8 because I wanted sharpness all over the image and get rid of the vignetting. And yeah, I couldn't do that just by click, by knowing what it was. I had to actually look and see what I'd set it to. I say, but that's because this lens is probably intended also for video use, where you usually don't want click stop apertures, but a different matter there. There is no lens hood with this. It's built in. As you can see, there's a slight bit of depth here. On Laowa's, they do suggest that you can put large filters on this, the big sort of filter box type contraptions on the front. Yeah, you can do it. I just don't use filters with lenses this wide very often. It's a very wide angle. The light that's coming in with the filters is coming through the filter at quite a narrow angle, and is going to show up imperfections in the filters and variations in thickness. So something to be used with care. So we've got that. Now, looking at the image itself, this is the shot I used for looking at the how good straight lines are. And straight lines are absolutely dead straight with this. This has been optimized for rectilinear projection, so straight line, and there is essentially, I can spot no significant distortion in the lens at all from that point of view. So if you want to do this sort of stuff, obviously architectural stuff, if the camera is level, and then buildings will be straight, but the moment you tip the camera upwards, as I'll show in some shots in a bit, that's when you start getting converging lines, various things. Now, as it stands, that looks great. It's sharp enough right through the corners here. This was This was f8. I've got a sequence. I put more detailed shots like this in the written review. So if you're curious for that, I'll be doing that. But I've got to take some more photos with this before I finish off the written review for a few more examples of it. But that's looking in there. Now, inside the building, now I use this for testing a lot. It's an interesting bit with all the staircases running everywhere. There's no significant amounts of chromatic aberration. No real fringing on it. The lens is very well corrected in that respect, but there is a bit of loss of sharpness towards the edges, but it's not much. I mean, the detail I've got in this is perfectly good enough for my commercial uses. Now, if it was being used as a big picture and it was going to be printed at this size, I would almost certainly use something like Sharpen AI on this. Now, it turns out that the lens aberrations you get in the corners of wide lenses like this, and I notice it particularly when I'm using shifted lenses, the aberrations are quite similar to camera shake. So if you use a lens correction filter with something like Sharpen AI, which is particularly good, if you use that with this, you will get a lot of sharpening. Now, it may do a bit too much sharpening towards the middle. Well, if I need that, I will have the original image and I will have the sharpened image as an extra. I do this in Photoshop. Sharpened one as an extra layer over it, and I may do a radial filter, a radial mask on the sharpened layer, so that effectively I'm only applying the really strong correction in the corners. But I've got articles looking at that in some of my other reviews and things like that. So I don't regard corner softness as that much of a problem. Now, I've had people tell me that this lens, for example, is wholly unsuited to use on a camera like this. Well, yeah. From my point of view, it's okay. It gives me the coverage. Likewise with this one. Yes, you could get sharper lenses, but there aren't any available. And sometimes if you want the shot, you have to accept that you're maybe going to need to do a bit of extra processing on it to make up for the lens, because there just isn't the lens available that you want. Either that, or you're not got the £3,000 or £4,000 spare to buy the lens which will give you what you want, if it even existed. So there we go, there's that. Now, view there. Sideways view. You can get a clear idea of the coverage you get with 17mm. It is 17mm on this, so about 14. It is very wide. Think about what's going on in the image. Here, look for strong lines, diagonals. Here the camera is kept vertical. Now I'm using the level, inbuilt level on this. The camera's kept vertical just for that. So by keeping the camera level, these columns and parts of the window frames are all straight. They're not doing that, they're not doing that. That's what I want in this. Now this is where I would normally, if in shots, I would normally think of the view I want and then think, well, do I want a bit more of the view towards the top? Do I want a bit more view of the bottom? And that's where I would use shift for it. But you can get away perfectly well, keep the camera level, use that. So now, I went off to another part of the building, and this is the bit. The brown thin stripes in the image earlier are up above this, and this is the bit. So that shot that I took earlier was taken just, sort of 20, 30 yards out here. This is walking along. It's lovely and straight. There is no bulging, no bending, and if you do architecture and stuff, that matters. Even for landscape. It is less so a problem until you have a lens that has any curvature, until you have straight things in it, until you have the odd sort of lamppost or something in your picture or so. And I don't want bent things like that. I will correct them in Photoshop if need be. If I want straight lines, I'm going to have straight lines. I much prefer it if, like this, the lens actually gives me straight lines to start with. So there we go. And that's sideways view of it. Right, now I said I was going to look at how I would take some pictures with this particular lens. Now this is in the same building, but The building itself, there was an old building, the tower in it, and then the new bit was added onto the side of it. The problem between them was that the distance between the floors and the arrangement of the floors in the tower didn't match up with the planned arrangement of the floors and everything in the new bit. I don't know exactly why, but this often happens when you put new bits of buildings on old bits of buildings. So this is in the, I'm here in the School of Architecture, the Architecture Department, which is most of this off here. This would be at f8, and you can see I focus on the distance, and at f8 I've got quite a lot of detail here. You do get a lot of detail. If you stop down on this with wide angle like this, you've got a lot of depth of field. It's not pin sharp, but it doesn't really matter because you're tending to look down here anyway. So that's the, this is where the two buildings jut against each other and the floors don't quite meet. This means there's quite a complex of lifts and things. Now the bit I had walked through this bit before I'm going to show, but this is a bit that is not normally, I don't normally go through, and I'd forgotten about. And I thought, oh, I've got this lens, I'll take it, I'll go there and I'll explore just some ideas how I would take some pictures if I'm looking at it. Now, in a real job, a paying job, for example, I would have a collection of lenses. I wouldn't go along with just one lens and just force myself to use one lens, but it can be useful, and it's one of the reasons why when I test lenses I usually get just one lens to test, because otherwise if I take 2 or 3 lenses I may have a favorite for something. It's much easier to go out and test just the one lens and force yourself to use it. So there we go, camera's level here, hence why the lines, vertical lines, are nice and straight. So let's go to this place. Now, this is on the ground floor. The old building, reception, is through to one in the distance there. You can see the small staircase, which gives you an indication already of changing levels. This is looking through there. This is a level camera. So we've got this area here where you would come in, go through. This is part of the reception area here. Once you go up above it, it starts getting a bit more mixed. Now, this is looking up. Now, immediately, because I'm looking up, I've got lines running all over the place. Now, you may decide that this actually works for the image you're trying to show. And I will take, if I'm doing an architectural project, I will take a set of shots like this. Now this one also shows, you can see the sun stars of showing on one of the light sources here, but I will take this. So there's reception down there, and this is looking up towards where the different floors are. You can see the big numbers on the wall indicating which floor is where. So this was looking up there. Now I'll just go up there. This is now up on that level. Here is that little staircase. And here's where the shots I was just taken was down here. This is one of the big numbers on the wall here. And we've got, now I'm into this section here, we've got a big open area. And let's see, we're going to have a look at that. There we go, I'm now looking up. Now, with any shots like this, how you set your lines and how you do various angles and things is entirely up to you, obviously. But it's worthwhile sometimes, just with wide angle lenses, taking, and I'll show some examples in a bit of this, of just taking several shots at different angles to get a feel for what works. Now I'm looking up here, I've got mixed lighting, so I've had to process this afterwards, careful with the white balance here, because I've got some artificial lighting which is leaving a slight pinkish tone, and I've got daylight coming through the skylight at the top here, so that's looking up there. Now if I move up, I've now come up a level, and here we are in the area, the open area, where these are the floors that go through to the building. This is the one with the brown stripy front on it that you've seen on that. We've got some vertical skylights here which make some sort of vertical windows and skylights at the top. The whole lot, you know, it's a matter of deciding how it looks. Would I take a shot like this? Normally, I might well do. The way I generally approach a space like this is, first of all, just have a walk around it. See how it works. If there are people in it, how do the people use it? How, you know, have a feel of the space if possible. Ideally, I want to explore the space before I even think about taking photos, so I have a perception of what the space is and how it's used. Now, this one, I'm one hand behind my back because I've decided I'm just using this one lens. So it means that some of these are not necessarily optimal, but yeah, that gives a nice feel for the space, the height of it, and these little balconies here. There we go, it's looking round the other direction, and you can see now the numbers, and you can see how the floor numbers don't match up. Interestingly enough, these lifts here, if you get into this particular set of lifts here, they are lifts that open two directions. So you've got a vast great panel of lift buttons with 2, 3, 3A, 4, 4A, 5, you know, I'm assuming that, you know, that an awful lot of people come out of lift doors here, look around and realise they don't realise quite where they are and go up or walk up the stairs perhaps even. But that's looking up that way. You can see the degree show was on at the time, so there's quite a few sort of displays and things here. This is the architectural workshop, model making workshop. There's a big printer in there as well. But so we look at that. I'm now looking upwards directly. Now, once again, how you set those lines, those diagonal lines and things, and how you put stuff in, it's a matter of just deciding what works. Do I like the fact that this bit of pipe work runs here? Does it matter? Not necessarily. It has a fairly, you know, the skylight at the top has given it a fairly central look. Now, I've gone up to the top. If I was taking shots for, yeah, there's a limit how many I'm going to do doing this, I would have visited each of these spots here and see what it looks. Because over on this, there's the big glass walls here, and there are sort of seminar rooms, lecture places over on this side as well. But we've got this here, so that's the look looking down on it. Now, there's a space you can see through here. That's not the ground floor, that's the first floor I was on. And then you can just see below that is the actual ground floor where I started. And there we go. There's a slightly different angle, but this time I've waited until there were some people walking through it. Having people walking through like this gives a much better sense of scale. Now, if I was doing this, as I say, on a job, what else might I might well have taken this shot, but I'd probably be using a tripod, and I might well have taken this at, let's say, 1/2 second exposure to blur these people and give a bit of movement. Now, you can't see any of these people. They're either being viewed from above, or there's somebody who's viewed from behind here walking along. If there were more people in it, I might choose a longer exposure just to blur them. But you do have to be careful when you're photographing groups of people, blurring them by a longer exposure, in that you get the lost foot effect. Now, when you walk, during part of your stride, one foot is relatively stationary for a while the other foot comes up and travels across. That means that if your exposure, if you take a picture of a crowd of, let's say, a 1/2 second or a second exposure, you will get lots of blur because people are moving. But you will get isolated feet where somebody just happens to have plonked the foot down on the ground at the start of the exposure, and your exposure goes through, and they just lift it off towards the, so most of the exposure, that foot is stationary. Now, the leg and the rest of the body may be blurred, but you end up with just isolated feet. Something to be wary of if you're just taking pictures of people on a longer exposure to blur the people. Here, it's just an ordinary, it's handheld shot looking down there. So, a slightly different view. I'm not sure which ones work. On a real job, I would go through, I would cull the ones that I think are absolutely awful, just don't work compositionally or otherwise. I do not think heavily about every single picture. I will take some pictures just because I think, yeah, that works. That picture up there on the wall, that print, that's an example of one I walked by and I thought, yeah, that works. just one shot I took of that. Took a few other shots walking around. That's the one that worked. That's the one that the architects who built that particular building are also the architects for this particular building here. And I took quite a lot of photos for, you know, for their website and publicity as well. But that's a slightly different view looking down there, as is that. Now, it's one of those things you decide, which does that work better or does that work better? Well, I think maybe that one works better. But this is one of the bits I do about the architectural photography, is that yes, I've gone here and just used this one lens. Now, I quite often will go round and take a load of pictures of a building using a particular lens. I may then change the lens and go round and take another set of pictures. I may repeat that process. Very rarely do I go to one spot and take the picture with different lenses at the same time. It's a matter of thinking, yeah, what am I using here? How am I presenting this space? It's whatever works for you. When I have all the pictures done, as I said, I will cull the obvious bad ones, but I will leave a collection of views in it. I've found, and this is something you check before with clients, how many pictures are they expecting? If they're expecting 4 pictures, and they say we want 4 pictures, and they say which 4 pictures they want, I will give them 4 pictures and then probably say, I've got a few similar ones if you want to look at some different angles, slightly different angles. If they say we'd just like a load of pictures of the building so we can use them as and when, for we don't know what we're going to use them for, that's when I will take a mix of pictures with this. Nice dead straight pictures. I would take probably pictures from each of these little balconies here. I'd take pictures around. I'd take lots of pictures for it, and I'd supply lots. Very rarely have I come away from a job thinking I took too many pictures. Architectural photography is to me like landscape photography, and has to have a bit of spontaneity about it. Yes, there are planned shots, there are pictures when you think, yes, I'm going to take this, I'm going to set this one up, I know what the lighting I want, I know where I want the sun to be, various things like that. That's part and parcel of it. But there is an element of just walking around and just looking at somewhere, and you cannot beat just actually walking around the space and thinking, that's an interesting view. Then when you come back, you think, right, yes, that is an interesting view. But actually, if I move a couple of foot to one side, I've got an even better looking view. Now, if I can't decide whether this is better or this is better, I don't make that decision when I'm taking the photos. I'll take 2 photos and then decide afterwards which is the better. It's not like I've got rolls of film that I've got to pay for processing and stuff like that. It doesn't cost me any extra, maybe a little bit of time sorting things out, but I'd much rather have enough pictures and be able to give a good set of images to a client. And yeah, some of these I would include, some of these I wouldn't bother, some of these I would, but that's typical of what I would do for taking pictures. And it's just using this, the Laowa 17. So anyway, what's the lens like? It's a great lens to use. It is sharp enough. I personally would like click stops on here. Weight, nice smooth focus throw, no electronics. It's a problem for some people, not for me when I'm using it with this. The images are sharp enough to be useful. I'm not sure for astro work. I think you'd probably find the f4 aperture and the extra glass in it. You might find your star images are not that great towards the corners, but I don't think it's really for that. Yeah, it's a nice lens. Personally, I want the shift, even if it's just a few millimeters of shift. Even with this, if I have to work on it, because this gives me such a wide angle. This is a lens I used quite a lot on the 5DS and also the 24mm. Now the 24mm gives me an equivalent of about 19 when put on this, and that matches an angle I want. So this is much less likely to be used than it was on this one, but the 24 is perhaps a little bit more. And obviously I'm waiting at some point for the Fuji 30mm tilt shift lens, and that should be rather nice. But Laowa, they make some nice lenses. Yeah, they're fully manual, they have no electronics. Yeah, if that's a problem, it's a problem. Tough. I don't find it. I like their lenses. They make interesting lenses. I mean, I tested the long probe lens and various other ones, so I've got quite a lot of stuff. I put links in the notes to this, and when I've done the written version of the review, I'll also add the link to the written article as well, which will have a few more photos in it and some more technical details of stuff like this in it. Now, I hope that's been of use to you. Quite a longish video. But if you've got any questions, let me know. I've got this here for a while. And thanks for watching. And oh, please do subscribe to the channel. The bit I'm told I should always mention at the start, but whatever. Yeah, perhaps the people who subscribe are the people who manage to sit all the way through one of these things. Anyway, thanks very much, and goodbye.